Oh,
Chapter 17. After a fairly shaky start to the day, Arthur's mind was beginning to reassemble itself from the shell-shocked fragments the previous day had left him with. He had found a Nutramatic machine which had provided him with a plastic cup filled with a liquid that was almost, but not quite, entirely unlike tea. The way it functioned was very interesting. When the drink button was pressed, it made an instant but highly detailed examination of the subject's taste buds, a spectroscopic analysis of the subject's metabolism, and then sent tiny experimental signals down the neural pathways to the taste centers of the subject's brain to see what was likely to go down well. However, no one knew quite why it did this because it invariably delivered a cupful of liquid that was almost, but not quite, entirely unlike tea. The Nutramatic was designed and manufactured by the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation, whose complaints department now covers all the major landmasses of the first 3 planets in the Sirius Tau star system. Arthur drank the liquid and found it reviving. He glanced up at the screens again and watched a few more 100 miles of barren grayness slide past. It suddenly occurred to him to ask a question that had been bothering him. "Is it safe?" he said. "Magrathea has been dead for 5 million years, said Zaphod. Of course it's safe. Even the ghosts will have settled down and raised families by now." At which point, a strange and inexplicable sound thrilled suddenly through the bridge. A noise as of a distant fanfare, a hollow, reedy, insubstantial sound. It preceded a voice that was equally hollow, reedy, and insubstantial. The voice said, "Greetings to you." Someone from the dead planet was talking to them. "Computer!" shouted Zephon. "Hi there. What the photon is it?" "Oh, just some 5 million-year-old tape that's being broadcast at us." "A what? A recording?" "Shush," said Ford. "It's carrying on." The voice was old, courteous, almost charming, but was underscored with quite unmistakable menace. "This is a recorded announcement," it said, "as I'm afraid we're all out at the moment. The Commercial Council of Magrathea thanks you for your esteemed visit." "A voice from ancient Magrathea," shouted Zaphod. Okay, said Ford. "But regrets," continued the voice, "that the entire planet is temporarily closed for business. Thank you. If you would care to leave your name and the address of a planet where you can be contacted, kindly speak when you hear the tone." A short buzz followed, then silence. "They want to get rid of us," said Trillian nervously. "What do we do?" "It's just a recording," said Zaphod. "We keep going. Got that, computer?" "I got it," said the computer and gave the ship an extra kick of speed. They waited. After a second or so came the fanfare once again, and then the voice. "We would like to assure you that as soon as our business is resumed, announcements will be made in all fashionable magazines and color supplements, when our clients will once again be able to select from all that's best in contemporary geography." The menace in the voice took on a sharper edge. "Meanwhile, we thank our clients for their kind interest and would ask them to leave. Now." Arthur looked round the nervous faces of his companions. "Well, I suppose we'd better be going then, hadn't we?" he suggested. "Shh," said Zaphod. "There's absolutely nothing to be worried about." "Then why is everyone so tense?" "They're just interested," shouted Zaphod. "Computer, start descent into the atmosphere and prepare for landing." This time the fanfare was quite perfunctory, the voice now distinctly cold. "It is most gratifying," it said, "that your enthusiasm for our planet continues unabated, and so we would like to assure you that the guided missiles currently converging with your ship are part of a special service we extend to all of our most enthusiastic clients, and the fully armed nuclear warheads are, of course, merely a courtesy detail. We look forward to your custom in future lives. Thank you." The voice snapped off. "Oh," said Trillian. Said Arthur. "Well," said Ford. "Look," said Zaphod, "will you get it into your heads? That's just a recorded message. It's millions of years old. Doesn't apply to us. Get it?" "What?" said Trillian quietly. About the missiles. Missiles! Don't make me laugh! Ford tapped Zaphod on the shoulder and pointed at the rear screen. Clear in the distance behind them, 2 silver darts were climbing through the atmosphere toward the ship. A quick change of magnification brought them into close focus. 2 massively real rockets thundering through the sky. The suddenness of it was shocking. I think they're going to have a very good try at applying to us, said Ford. Zaphod stared at them in astonishment. Hey, this is terrific, he said. Someone down there is trying to kill us. Terrific, said Arthur. But don't you see what this means? Yes, we're going to die. Yes, but apart from that. Apart from that? It means we must be on to something. How soon can we get off it? Second by second, the image of the missiles on the screen grew larger. They had swung round now onto a direct homing course so that all that could be seen of them now was the warheads, head on. As a matter of interest, said Trillian, what are we going to do? Just keep cool, said Zaphod. Is that all? Shouted Arthur. No, we're going to, take evasive action, said Zaphod with a sudden access of panic. Computer, what evasive action can we take? None, I'm afraid, guys, said the computer. Or something, said Zaphod. He said. There seems to be something jamming my guidance systems, explained the computer brightly. Impact minus 45 seconds. Please call me Eddie if it will help you to relax. Zaphod tried to run in several equally decisive directions simultaneously. Right, he said. We've got to get manual control of this ship. Can you fly her? Asked Ford pleasantly. No, can you? No. Trillian, can you? No. Fine, said Zaphod, relaxing. We'll do it together. I can't either, said Arthur, who felt it was time he began to assert himself. I'd guessed that, said Zaphod. Okay, computer. I want full manual control now. You got it, said the computer. Several large desk panels slid open and banks of control consoles sprang up out of them, showering the crew with bits of expanded polystyrene packaging and balls of rolled-up cellophane. These controls had never been used before. Zaphod stared at them wildly. Okay, Ford, he said. Full retro thrust and 10 degrees starboard. Or something. Good luck, guys, chirped the computer. Impact minus 30 seconds. Ford leaped to the controls. Only a few of them made any immediate sense to him, so he pulled those. The ship shook and screamed as its guidance rocket jets tried to push it every which way simultaneously. He released half of them, and the ship spun around in a tight arc headed back the way it had come, straight toward the oncoming missiles. Air cushions ballooned out of the walls in an instant as everyone was thrown against them. For a few seconds, the inertial forces held them flattened and squirming for breath, unable to move. Zaphod struggled and pushed in manic desperation and finally managed a savage kick at a small lever that formed part of the guidance system. The lever snapped off. The ship twisted sharply and rocketed upward. The crew were hurled violently back across the cabin. Ford's copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy smashed into another section of the control console. With the combined result, the guide started to explain to anyone who cared to listen about the best ways of smuggling Antarean parakeet glands out of Antares. An Antarean parakeet gland stuck on a small stick is a revolting but much sought-after cocktail delicacy, and very large sums of money are often paid for them by very rich idiots who want to impress other very rich idiots. And the ship suddenly dropped out of the sky like a stone. It was, of course, more or less at this moment, that one of the crew sustained a nasty bruise to the upper arm. This should be emphasized because, as has already been revealed, they escape otherwise completely unharmed, and the deadly nuclear missiles do not eventually hit the ship. The safety of the crew is absolutely assured. Impact minus 20 seconds, guys, said the computer. Then turn the bloody engines back on, bawled Zaphod. Oh, sure thing, guys, said the computer. With a subtle roar, the engines cut back in. The ship smoothly flattened out of its dive and headed back toward the missiles again. The computer started to sing. When you walk through the storm, it whined nasally. Hold your head up high. Zaphod screamed at it to shut up, but his voice was lost in the din of what they quite naturally assumed was approaching destruction. And don't be afraid of the dark, Eddie wailed. The ship, in flattening out, had in fact flattened out upside down, and lying on the ceiling as they were, it was now totally impossible for any of the crew to reach guidance systems. At the end of the storm, crooned Eddie. The two missiles loomed massively on the screen as they thundered toward the ship. Is a golden sky, but by an extraordinarily lucky chance, they had not yet fully corrected their flight paths to that of the erratically weaving ship, and they passed right under it. And the sweet silver song of the lark, revised impact time 15 seconds, fellas. Walk on through the wind. The missiles banked round in a screeching arc and plunged back in pursuit. This is it, said Arthur, watching them. We are now quite definitely going to die, aren't we? I wish you'd stop saying that, shouted Ford. Well, we are, aren't we? Yes. Walk on through the rain, sang Eddie. A thought struck Arthur. He struggled to his feet. Why doesn't anyone turn on this improbability drive thing? He said. We could probably reach that. What are you, crazy? Said Zaphod. Without proper programming, anything could happen. Does that matter at this stage? Shouted Arthur. Though your dreams be tossed and blown, sang Eddie. Arthur scrambled up onto one of the excitingly chunky pieces of molded contouring where the curve of the wall met the ceiling. Walk on, with hope in your heart. Does anyone know why Arthur can't turn on the improbability drive? Shouted Trillian. And you'll never walk alone. Impact minus 5 seconds. It's been great knowing you guys. God bless. You'll never walk alone. I said, yelled Trillian. Does anyone know? The next thing that happened was a mind-mingling explosion of noise and light. Chapter 18. And the next thing that happened after that was that the Heart of Gold continued on its way perfectly normally with a rather fetchingly redesigned interior. It was somewhat larger and done out in delicate pastel shades of green and blue. In the center, a spiral staircase leading nowhere in particular stood in a spray of ferns and yellow flowers, and next to it, a stone sundial pedestal housed the main computer terminal. Cunningly deployed lighting and mirrors created the illusion of standing in a conservatory overlooking a wide stretch of exquisitely manicured garden. Around the periphery of the conservatory area stood marble-top tables on intricately beautiful wrought iron legs. As you gazed into the polished surface of the marble, the vague forms of instruments became visible, and as you touched them, the instruments materialized instantly under your hands. Looked at from the correct angles, the mirrors appeared to reflect all the required data readouts, though it was far from clear where they were reflected from. It was, in fact, sensationally beautiful. Relaxing in a wickerwork sun chair, Zaphod Beeblebrox said, What the hell happened? Well, I was just saying, said Arthur, lounging by a small fish pool. There's this improbability drive switch over here. He waved at where it had been. There was a potted plant there now. But where are we? Said Ford, who was sitting on the spiral staircase, a nicely chilled pan-galactic gargle blaster in his hand. Exactly where we were, I think, said Trillian, as all about them the mirror suddenly showed them an image of the blighted landscape of Magrathea, which still scooted along beneath them. Zaphod leaped out of his seat. Then what's happened to the missiles? He said. A new and astounding image appeared in the mirrors. They would appear, said Ford doubtfully, To have turned into a bowl of petunias and a very surprised-looking whale. At an improbability factor, cut in Eddie, who hadn't changed a bit, of 8,767,128 to 1 against. Zaphod stared at Arthur. "Did you think of that, Earthman?" he demanded. "Well," said Arthur, "all I did was—" "That's very good thinking, you know. Turn on the improbability drive for a second without first activating the proofing screens. Hey, kid, you just saved our lives, you know that?" "Oh," said Arthur. "Well, it was nothing, really." "Was it?" said Zaphod. "Oh, well, forget it then. Okay, computer, take us into Len." "But," I said, "forget it." Another thing that got forgotten was the fact that against all probability, a sperm whale had suddenly been called into existence several miles above the surface of an alien planet. And since this is not a naturally tenable position for a whale, this poor innocent creature had very little time to come to terms with its identity as a whale before it then had to come to terms with not being a whale anymore. This is a complete record of its thought from the moment it began its life till the moment it ended it. "Ah, what's happening?" it thought. Excuse me, who am I? Hello? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What do I mean by who am I? Calm down, get a grip now. Oh, this is an interesting sensation. What is it? It's sort of yawning, tingling sensation in well, I suppose I'd better start finding names for things if I want to make any headway in what, for the sake of what I shall call an argument, I shall call the world. So let's call it my stomach. Good. Oh, it's getting quite strong. And hey, what about this whistling, roaring sound going past what I'm suddenly going to call my head? Perhaps I can call that wind. Is that a good name? It'll do. Perhaps I can find a better name for it later when I found out what it's for. It must be something very important because there certainly seems to be a hell of a lot of it. Hey, what's this thing? Let's call it a tail. Yeah, tail. Hey, I can really thrash it about pretty good, can't I? Wow! Wow! That feels great. Doesn't seem to achieve very much, but I'll probably find out what it's for later on. Now, have I built up any coherent picture of things yet? No. Never mind. Hey, this is really exciting. So much to find out about, so much to look forward to. I'm quite dizzy with anticipation. Or is it the wind? There really is a lot of that now, isn't there? And wow, hey, what's this thing suddenly coming toward me very fast? Very, very fast. So big and flat and round, it needs a big, wide-sounding name like ow, ound, ground. That's it. That's a good name. Ground. I wonder if it will be friends with me. And the rest, after a sudden wet thud, was silence. Curiously enough, the only thing that went through the mind of the bowl of petunias as it fell was, "Oh no, not again." Many people have speculated that if we knew exactly why the bowl of petunias had thought that, we would know a lot more about the nature of the universe than we do now. Chapter 19. "Are we taking this robot with us?" said Ford, looking with distaste at Marvin, who was standing in an awkward, hunched posture in the corner under a small palm tree. Zaphod glanced away from the mirror screens, which presented a panoramic view of the blighted landscape on which the Heart of Gold had now landed. "Oh, the paranoid android," he said. "Yeah, we'll take him." "But what are you supposed to do with a manically depressed robot?" "You think you've got problems," said Marvin, as if he was addressing a newly occupied coffin. "What are you supposed to do if you are a manically depressed robot? No, don't bother to answer that. I'm 50,000 times more intelligent than you, and even I don't know the answer. Gives me a headache just trying to think down to your level." Trillian burst in through the door from her cabin. "My white mice have escaped," she said. An expression of deep worry and concern failed to cross either of Zaphod's faces. "Nuts to your white mice," he said. Trillian glared an upset glare at him and disappeared again. It is possible that her remark would have commanded greater attention had it been generally realized that human beings were only the third most intelligent life form present on planet Earth, instead of, as generally was thought by most independent observers, the second. "Good afternoon, boys." The voice was oddly familiar, but oddly different. It had a matriarchal twang. It announced itself to the crew as they arrived at the airlock hatchway that would let them out on the planet's surface. They looked at each other in puzzlement. "It's the computer," explained Zaphod. "I discovered it had an emergency backup personality that I thought might work out better." "Now, this is going to be your first day out on a strange new planet," continued Eddie's new voice. "So I want you all wrapped up snug and warm, and no playing with any naughty, bug-eyed monsters." Zaphod tapped impatiently on the hatch. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think we might be better off with a slide rule." "Right," snapped the computer. "Who said that?" "Will you open up the exit hatch, please, computer?" said Zaphod, trying not to get angry. "Not until whoever said that owns up," urged the computer, stamping a few synapses closed. "Oh, God," muttered Ford, slumped against a bulkhead. He started to count to 10. He was desperately worried that one day sentient life forms would forget how to do this. Only by counting could humans demonstrate their independence of computers. "Come on," said Eddie sternly. "Computer," began Zaphod. "I'm waiting," interrupted Eddie. "I can wait all day if necessary." "Computer," said Zaphod again, who had been trying to think of some subtle piece of reasoning to put the computer down with, and had decided not to bother competing with it on its own ground. "If you don't open that exit hatch this moment, I shall zap straight off to your major database and reprogram you with a very large axe. Got that?" Eddie, shocked, paused and considered this. Ford carried on counting quietly. This is about the most aggressive thing you can do to a computer, the equivalent of going up to a human being and saying, "Blood, blood, blood, blood." Finally, Eddie said quietly, "I can see this relationship is something we're all going to have to work at." And the hatchway opened. An icy wind ripped into them. They hugged themselves warmly and stepped down the ramp onto the barren dust of Magrathea. "It'll all end in tears, I know it!" shouted Eddie after them and closed the hatchway again. A few minutes later, he opened and closed the hatchway again in response to a command that caught him entirely by surprise. Chapter 20. 5 figures wandered slowly over the blighted land. Bits of it were dullish gray, bits of it dullish brown. The rest of it rather less interesting to look at. It was like a dried-out marsh, now barren of all vegetation and covered with a layer of dust about an inch thick. It was very cold. Zaphod was clearly rather depressed about it. He stalked off by himself and was soon lost to sight behind a slight rise in the ground. The wind stung Arthur's eyes and ears, and the stale, thin air clasped his throat. However, the thing that was stung most was his mind. "It's fantastic," he said, and his own voice rattled in his ears. Sound carried badly in this thin atmosphere. "Desolate hole, if you ask me," said Ford. "I could have more fun in a cat litter." He felt a mounting irritation. Of all the planets in all the star systems of all the galaxy, many wild and exotic, seething with life, didn't he just have to turn up at a dump like this after 15 years of being a castaway? Not even a hot dog stand in evidence. He stooped down and picked up a cold clod of earth, but there was nothing underneath it worth crossing thousands of light years to look at. "No," insisted Arthur. "Don't you understand? This is the first time I've actually stood on the surface of another planet. A whole alien world. Pity it's such a dump, though." Trillian hugged herself, shivered, and frowned. She could have sworn she saw a slight and unexpected movement out of the corner of her eye, but when she glanced in that direction, all she could see was the ship, still and silent, 100 yards or so behind them. She was relieved when a second or so later they caught sight of Zaphod standing on top of the ridge of ground and waving to them to come and join him. He seemed to be excited, but they couldn't clearly hear what he was saying because of the thinnish atmosphere and the wind. As they approached the ridge of higher ground, they became aware that it seemed to be circular, a crater about 150 yards wide. Round the outside of the crater, the sloping ground was spattered with black and red lumps. They stopped and looked at a piece. It was wet. It was rubbery. With horror, they suddenly realized that it was fresh whale meat. At the top of the crater's lip, they met Zaphod. "Look," he said, pointing into the crater. In the center lay the exploded carcass of a lonely sperm whale that hadn't lived long enough to be disappointed with its lot. The silence was only disturbed by the slight, involuntary spasms of Trillian's throat. "I suppose there's no point in trying to bury it, is it?" murmured Arthur, and then wished he hadn't. "Come," said Zaphod, and started back down into the crater. "What, down there?" said Trillian with severe distaste. "Yeah," said Zaphod. "Come on, I've got something to show you." "We can see it," said Trillian. "Not that," said Zaphod. "Something else. Come on." They all hesitated. "Come on," insisted Zaphod. "I've found a way in." "In?" said Arthur in horror. "Into the interior of the planet, an underground passage. The force of the whale's impact cracked it open, and that's where we have to go. Where no man has trod these 5 million years, into the very depths of time itself." Marvin started his ironical humming again. Zaphod hit him, and he shut up. With little shudders of disgust, they all followed Zaphod down the incline into the crater, trying very hard to avoid looking at its unfortunate creator. "Life," said Marvin dolefully. "Loathe it or ignore it. You can't like it." The ground had caved in where the whale had hit it, revealing a network of galleries and passages now largely obstructed by collapsed rubble and entrails. Zaphod had made a start clearing a way into one of them, but Marvin was able to do it rather faster. Dank air wafted out of its dark recesses, and as Zaphod shone a flashlight into it, little was visible in the dusty gloom. "According to the legends," he said, "the Magratheans lived most of their lives underground." "Why's that?" said Arthur. "Did the surface become too polluted or overpopulated?" "No, I don't think so," said Zaphod. "I think they just didn't like it very much." "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" said Trillian, peering nervously into the darkness. "We've been attacked once already, you know." "Look, kid, I promise you the live population of this planet is nil plus the 4 of us, so come on, let's get on in there. Hey, Earthman." "Arthur," said Arthur. "Yeah, could you just sort of keep this robot with you and guard this end of the passageway, okay?" "Guard?" said Arthur. "What from? You just said there's no one here." "Yeah, well, just for safety, okay?" said Zaphod. "Whose? Yours or mine?" "Good lad. Okay, here we go." Zaphod scrambled down into the passageway, followed by Trillian and Ford. "Well, I hope you all have a really miserable time," complained Arthur. "Don't worry," Marvin assured him. "They will." In a few seconds, they had disappeared from view. Arthur stamped around in a huff, and then decided that a whale's graveyard is not, on the whole, a good place to stamp around in. Marvin eyed him balefully for a moment, and then turned himself off. Zaphod marched quickly down the passageway, nervous as hell, but trying to hide it by striding purposefully. He flung the beam around. The walls were covered in dark tiles and were cold to the touch, the air thick with decay. "There, what did I tell you?" he said. An inhabited planet. Magrathea. And he strode on through the dirt and debris that littered the tile floors. Trillian was reminded unavoidably of the London Underground, though it was less thoroughly squalid. At intervals along the walls, the tiles gave way to large mosaics, simple angular patterns in bright colors. Trillian stopped and studied one of them, but could not interpret any sense in them. She called to Zaphod. "Hey, have you any idea what these strange symbols are?" "I think they're just strange symbols of some kind," said Zaphod, hardly glancing back. Trillian shrugged and hurried after him. From time to time, a doorway led either to the left or right into smallish chambers, which Ford discovered to be full of derelict computer equipment. He dragged Zaphod into one to have a look. Trillian followed. "Look," said Ford, "you reckon this is Magrathea?" "Yeah," said Zaphod, "and we heard the voice, right?" "Okay, so I've bought the fact that it's Magrathea for the moment. What you have so far said nothing about is how in the galaxy you found it. You didn't just look it up in a star atlas, that's for sure." "Research, government archives, detective work. Few lucky guesses, easy." "And then you stole the heart of gold to come and look for it with?" "I stole it to look for a lot of things." "A lot of things," said Ford in surprise. "Like what?" "I don't know." "What?" "I don't know what I'm looking for." "What not?" Because I think it might be because if I knew, I wouldn't be able to look for them." "What? Are you crazy?" "It's a possibility I haven't ruled out yet," said Zaphod quietly. "I only know as much about myself as my mind can work out under its current conditions. And its current conditions are not good." For a long time, nobody said anything as Ford gazed at Zaphod, with a mind suddenly full of worry. "Listen, old friend, if you want to," started Ford eventually. "No, wait, I'll tell you something," said Zaphod. "I freewheeled a lot. I get an idea to do something, and hey, why not? I do it. I reckon I'll become president of the galaxy, and it just happens. It's easy. I decide to steal the ship, I decide to look for Magrathea, and it all just happens. Yeah, I work out how it can best be done, right? But it always works out. It's like having a galactic credit card, which keeps on working, though you never send off the checks. And then whenever I stop and think, why did I want to do something? How did I work out how to do it? I get a very strong desire just to stop thinking about it. Like I have now. It's a big effort to talk about it." Zaphod paused for a while. For a while there was silence. Then he frowned and said, "Last night I was worrying about this again, about the fact that part of my mind just didn't seem to work properly. Then it occurred to me that the way it seemed was that someone else was using my mind to have good ideas with, without telling me about it. I put the two ideas together and decided that maybe that somebody had locked off part of my mind for that purpose, which was why I couldn't use it. I wondered if there was a way I could check. I went to the ship's medical bay and plugged myself into the encephalographic screen. I went through every major screening test on both my heads. All the tests I had to go through under government medical officers before my nomination for presidency could be properly ratified. They showed up nothing. Nothing unexpected, at least. They showed that I was clever, imaginative, irresponsible, untrustworthy, extrovert, nothing you couldn't have guessed. And no other anomalies. So I started inventing further tests, completely at random. Nothing. Then I tried superimposing the results from one head on top of the results from the other head. Still nothing. Finally, I got silly, because I'd given it all up as nothing more than an attack of paranoia. Last thing I did before I packed it in was take the superimposed picture and look at it through a green filter. You remember I was always suspicious about the color green when I was a kid. I always wanted to be a pilot on one of those trading scouts." Ford nodded. "And there it was," said Zaphod, "clear as day. A whole section in the middle of both brains that related only to each other and not to anything else around them. Some bastard had cauterized all the synapses and electronically traumatized those 2 lumps of cerebellum. Ford stared at him, aghast. Trillian had turned white. "Somebody did that to you?" whispered Ford. "Yeah." "But have you any idea who? Or why?" "Why? I can only guess. But I do know who the bastard was." "You know? How do you know?" "Because they left their initials burned into the cauterized synapses. They left them there for me to see." Ford stared at him in horror and felt his skin begin to crawl. "Initials? Burned into your brain?" "Yeah." "Well, what were they, for God's sake?" Zaphod looked at him in silence again for a moment. Then he looked away. "ZB," he said quietly. At that moment, a steel shutter slammed down behind them, and gas started to pour into the chamber. "I'll tell you about it later," choked Zaphod as all 3 passed out.